Thanks a lot, everybody, for joining to today's webinar by Ververica. So today's talk is going to be about contributing to Apache Flink and also a broader overview of how Apache works. This webinar will be recorded and made available tomorrow on the Ververica website. I've shared the link to the slides in the chat on SlideShare if you want to go through the slides yourself while I'm talking about them. And I know this is a webinar, but I would like to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions while I'm talking, feel free to open a question. So there's a Q&A functionality in Zoom, and I'm trying to keep an eye on the questions, and I will try to answer them while I'm talking. A few words about myself. My name is Robert. I'm a co-founder of Ververica, and I have worked on Apache Flink before it was even called Flink, or it was still called Stratosphere. It was back then a research project in Berlin at the universities here, and I've helped to bring Apache for Stratosphere into the Apache Software Foundation, and I've helped Flink to grow ever since. These days, I'm working on growing the Flink community as a software engineer, helping developers to have a good contribution experience. In this presentation, I will explain to you what the Apache Software Foundation is, about the roles at an Apache project. I will tell you how to become a committer at Apache, and then I will go into details on how to contribute to Apache Flink, about the different mailing lists, about how to contribute to the documentation, and finally, the thing that most people are interested in contributing code. And then I will be available for any questions you might have. And maybe as a motivation and explanation why I have the beginning part of the presentation about Apache and roles and so on, I think it makes sense to look at Apache Flink in the context of the Apache Software Foundation to really understand where we are coming from and why we are doing things the way we do. So I will explain the foundation and Apache Flink a little bit at the same time, because Flink has been added to the foundation as an independent open source project called Stratosphere back then. So Stratosphere was started in 2009, and in 2014 we proposed Stratosphere to the Apache Incubator. So the process of adding a open source project to Apache is by proposing it to a special Apache project that doesn't produce any software, it only produces new Apache projects. And that project is called the Incubator. And for adding a project there, you need to write a proposal that is like a predefined template. And then there's a discussion in the Incubator project about this proposal. And then there will be a vote. And after the vote, the project is considered an incubating project. So everything, like all the releases, all the documentation and so on, are marked as an incubating release, which means it's not an official Apache project, it's trying to be an Apache project, it's learning how to be an Apache project. And Flink was going through that phase till December 2014, which is quite short compared to other projects. And then Apache Flink became a top-level project after its graduation. And since December 2014, Flink is allowed, in an Apache sense, to make official releases and to be an independent project that is mostly controlled by the project management committee. Some projects will eventually die, and this is when they move into the attic, where Apache projects, source code and documentation and so on is stored. The Apache Software Foundation is celebrating its 20th birthday this year. It has been founded around the Apache HTTP server, and some people say that the name Apache comes from Apache server, because it consists of many small patches. Patches are what pull requests are today. And since then, the foundation has grown to over 300 open source projects today, with 52 projects currently being in the incubation phase. The project is run by, the foundation is run by 730 members and over 7,000 committers who work on the various projects. And what is really astonishing about the foundation is that it's driven by an all-volunteer, self-organized, decentralized organization. So there's a lot of people around the globe who have never met each other face-to-face, that are delivering in different time zones and different cultures, and they manage to keep this organization running and keep all these projects running. And what the foundation is providing is support for legal and infrastructure, and also, and I think that's the most important thing, and maybe even more important these days with GitHub and Bitbucket and so on, is that they provide a blueprint and a lot of experience for successful open source projects. So the Apache Foundation has its own approach to building communities. And one of the mantras that is being repeated over and over again is community over code. It's something quite difficult to explain and probably easiest to learn by doing it, by following others and by participating. Maybe I can talk about a few aspects of how a project works within Apache. So we are very collaborative. We are very open to collaboration. So everything that is happening in the project is happening in the open. So we try to do all the project direction decisions and all the project direction discussions to be open. So we only very specific topics are discussed behind closed doors. Everything else is in the open. So if you want to do a new release, if you want to decide on a roadmap, if you want to decide on a new build system, if you want to decide on a new website or anything, this is all being discussed publicly. So everybody can just participate independent of any status or anything. We are also a consensus-driven organization. We are trying to make sure that everybody is on board, even if they don't agree with our decisions. We want to make sure that everybody is on board with the decisions. We are looking for very diverse communities, mostly diversity around employers, because projects are not owned by companies, they're owned by the Apache Software Foundation. So it is one of the most important conditions for a project to graduate from the incubator to a top-level project to be independent of a single employer, because the foundation wants to make sure that a project does not stop existing or stop evolving if one entity goes away. And this is what all the Apache communities are working on. But of course, the communities are also very diverse in terms of backgrounds, because this brings more creativities, ideas, and perspective on different problems. Another important concept that explains community over code within the Apache Software Foundation are the different hats that people are wearing. So one hat is that people distinguish between their role as an employee and the interests of their employer within the community versus their individual interests. So we want to make sure that committers in an open source project like Flink are not only working towards the interest of the employer, but also towards the interest of the project, so that the project is healthy and succeeding. Another hat that you're wearing as a person being active in a project is that you might have conflicting interests. As a user, you want to release early. As a developer, you want to release stable. And as a project PMC member, you want the release to be compliant with the rules. And every individual within a community needs to be able to balance these different heads or interests and to make the right calls in the right setting. And finally, as part of this collaboration, our communication is very open through mailing lists. So everything that happens within projects is basically documented through mailing lists. So all the pull requests that are opened, all the Jira edits and so on, they're all reflected via the mailing lists. And with all these principles in place, a lot of very successful software projects have come out of the foundation in the last 20 years. They are mostly in the Java space, but there's also other directions. So some of the famous projects here is, for example, Maven, the build system, or Lucene, the search index, or Cassandra, the key value store, Kafka, Mesos, NetBeans, Hadoop, Hive, OpenOffice, and of course, Apache Flink. And another thing that is common to all these projects is the Apache software license, which is among the top 3 open source licenses. It is obviously used by all of the ASF projects, but also by many, many, many other projects. And what makes this license stand out is that it's very business friendly. So derivative work is allowed to be licensed differently, which effectively means that you can take an Apache licensed code and sell it with your products. You have to be careful with how you use the Apache brand and names. So you cannot use the Apache project name within your product, but you are allowed to take the source code if you follow the rules and sell it as a product. So this website that I'm linking here, TLDR Legal, is quite useful in understanding the differences in open source licenses. And what I want to stress again is that the Apache license has nothing directly to do with the foundation. So if you are an open source project, you can just use it and you have no relationship with the foundation. So a project that has this license is not necessarily an Apache project. The next important thing to understand is the roles at the ASF that I will explain based on the example of Apache Flink. So let me start with the bottom right, where I have the contributors and users. So contributors and users is basically everybody. Everybody can implement stuff for Flink. They can do testing. They can write documentation. They can support other users on online websites and so on. They can sign up to the public mailing lists. So here on the left, I have listed all the mailing lists. And actually, most of the stuff that happens within Flink is accessible to everybody. Let me quickly go through the mailing lists. So the development dev@flink.apache.org. The dev mailing list is where all the discussions between developers are happening. The user mailing list is where users help each other with problems. Then we have a Chinese-speaking user list for our quickly growing Chinese user base. And then there are more like system mailing lists, the commits list, where all the commits are replicated or sent to. Like for each commit, there's an email. For the builds mailing list for the build system, and the issues mailing list where all the changes to our Jira instance. So we are using Jira for bug tracking, where the Jira issues are reported to. The thing is that contributors and users don't have write access to the source code. That is a privilege that is only available to Flink committers. We are at roughly 45 committers, the Flink project recently started adding quite a lot of new committers. So this number is growing quite quickly. And committers are allowed to do changes to the source code of Flink, but also to the source code of documentation and the Flink website. Committers also get a user@apache.org email address, which a lot of people quite like because you get the power of the Apache brand, and it's like a sign of your role within Apache. And committers are elected by the project management committee, the PMC. So the Flink PMC is a small group of people that oversees the project. They are the final decision makers. They decide about releases. They make sure that all the releases are compliant to the Apache rules. And these Apache rules are there to ensure that there's a certain level of quality, not only in terms of the software, like the quality of the software, like stability, bugs, and so on, but also in terms of legal compliance. So we make sure that the binaries and the source code that we make available doesn't contain any code that has not been, like where there's any copyright violation, for example. So we make sure that all the code that we're using is licensed, that we are legally allowed to use it, and that also the binaries that we distribute are following the Apache rules. And the PMC is really also concerned about the long-term health of the project, because sometimes there are decisions like changing the rules of Flink or changing the direction of Flink, like removing some modules, accepting a larger outside contribution, and so on. And this is things that are decided by the PMC. The PMC has access to a mailing list called the private list, which is used to discuss things like promoting a contributor to a committer, or it's used to discuss issues that we cannot discuss on the development list. Usually the private list is very infrequently used. It's a few emails a month, so there's not many things happening there. The project PMC reports on a quarterly basis to the Apache Board of Directors, which oversee the day-to-day work of the foundation. So the PMCs basically report if all the projects are healthy, how they're growing, how they're adding PMC members, how they're adding committers, and how releases are going, and so on. PMC members, by the way, are elected also by the PMC. So the PMC holds votes on adding committers and also new PMC members. The board of directors of the ASF has access to another private mailing list, which is called board@apache.org. And the board is elected yearly by all the members of the ASF. So the members are basically the controlling body that oversee the work of the board. The board is doing the day-to-day work. Members have access to another private list, the members list. Both the members and the board list are quite active, given that there's over 700 members in the ASF. There are some discussions internally on a lot of different topics around self-organization, publicity, diversity, and many other aspects of the foundation. So how to become a Flink committer? There's some formal requirements, one formal requirement, which is that the PMC needs to hold a vote to become a committer, and this vote happens behind closed doors on the private list. And basically, we as the PMC just look at the work of contributors and we propose somebody internally. So there's no official way of self-proposing yourself. You basically have to do good work within the community to be seen, and then we'll make you a committer. And what we are looking at is that people, contributors to Flink, show good contributions over a longer period of time with good technical oversight and experience. So we want people to be able to not only implement good code, but also review others' code and make sure that this code fits well into the overall architecture of Flink, that this makes sense in what we are currently working on. So if there's a big refactoring going on and then there's a pull request coming in for this particular part of the code base, it might not make sense, or we somehow have to consider this refactoring. So we want to see that people really have the ability to look at incoming contributions critically. So there's one question. How long is a long period of time? That's a good question. I would say the quickest that I have seen people become a committer is maybe around, let's say, 6 months of active work. So something between 6 months and maybe 24 months or so. It depends on a lot of things, like on how well people understand the Apache way, or of how good is the community engagement, how well is the person participating in discussions on the dev list, and also is the person interested in just getting their own contribution in, or are they trying to make the project itself healthy and successful. So it depends on many factors. I hope I was able to answer this question. So let me now move on to the different areas of contributing to Flink. And the first area where you can contribute is through contributing user support. So as I mentioned earlier, there's this user@flink.apache.org mailing list, which is the primary support channel for Flink. It has around 150 emails a week and over 1,000 subscribers. And there's, in my experience, generally two types of questions. One is, I have this error message, or I can't configure this thing, or how can I use this API? So fairly straightforward questions with straightforward answers. And then there is these more like architecture, design, consulting type questions, where people want to know how to approach a certain use case. You don't need to read all 150 emails a week. You can just pick certain topics and help the user out. Another quite popular place to get support is the Stack Overflow. So the Apache Flink tag has over 2,800 questions with 1,100 unanswered. So there's a lot of opportunity to collect points in Apache, in Stack Overflow. So it's really a low-hanging fruit to get some points. And I think it's a very nice way, and also the ranking within Google for Stack Overflow is extremely good. So your answers might potentially get a lot of attention. And this is really an amazing way of helping the Flink project to grow, because these people that ask questions are stuck on continuing with their adoption of Flink. So if somebody is really active there, that is great for the community. And this is actually also a way to become a committer. Many Apache projects appreciate not only the work that is done on the core code base, but also work that is done on user support or documentation is appreciated through committership in a project. And the last area for user support is Jira, the bug tracker, where sometimes people just report their problems as bugs. So very often these are not really bugs, it's just that somebody misunderstood something. There's another question on becoming a committer, which is whether you need to build a significant component to become a committer, such as SQL or a new connector. And the answer to this is very simple, no. It's honestly, I think we also, as Flink, we don't want to incentivize people to build new significant components, because this would let the project explode. But really, I think we are extremely happy about people picking up existing work. So there's over 500 open pull requests, for example. If we see that somebody is very active on reviewing them, even if they can't commit, you can still help with a review. You can maybe try to get in touch with a committer that helps you. So I'm, for example, very open for such people. That helps them with the final commit step. And I would suggest to specialize in a component and to get in touch or to work together with the people working on a certain component. So if you're interested in connectors, then just look at incoming tickets or open tickets and work on fixing them. Or if you are more interested in SQL, then just help the folks that are working on Flink SQL. There's really so much stuff to be worked on in Flink that there's no need to open up new battlefields. Another thing that we are going to open up soon is, or that we are actively working on, is machine learning. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to contribute implementations for machine learning algorithms. Okay, let me move on to another area where you can contribute to the success of Flink and to the project, and that is evangelism. So we are very happy about all the local meetup groups that exist all over the world. And Ververica is also offering support for running a meetup. So we have a guide on the Ververica website on how to run a meetup group. This guide contains a lot of best practices and lessons learned over the past years while hosting meetups. And we're also very happy if you reach out to us to support with our contacts for venue, for organizing, for getting speakers, for getting slides. We can also share or send you via mail some stickers and t-shirts and so on. So we're really happy about people that help to establish a local meetup group. And it's not as hard as it might sound. If you're living in a bigger city, there's usually quite an active meetup community. Another thing we really like is conferences. So if you're submitting talks at conferences about Flink, about your Flink use case, that's really great. And we also have a community at Flink Apache org mailing list to sync on conference talks. So if you're looking for another speaker, or if you need material, or if you're an organizer of a conference and you're looking for speakers, then this is the right place. We also really like blog posts on company blogs or personal blogs to share your Flink experience. And then, of course, there's social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, where you can share news. So what I, for example, like is local news groups. So, for example, a Facebook group for Flink in Taiwan, where there's Chinese language news about Flink. So this is another great way of spreading the word about Flink and to contribute to Flink. To contribute to Flink's actual development, one way without writing code is by participating on the development mailing list, which is the main communication and decision-making channel of Flink. On this mailing list, we're discussing flips. So FLIP is an abbreviation for Flink Improvement Proposal. It's a structured way of describing changes in Flink, and there's quite a high number of flips open all the time in Flink, and we as developers are looking for feedback, for example, on the API or on the deployment model or on the internals, to really build the best features. And all the features that are bigger than like a small fix or so usually deserve a flip, like a proper proposal where everything is laid out. Another thing that is happening on the development list is roadmap planning, release scheduling. So we're discussing on the list what features go in and when a release goes out. And we're also testing and voting on releases. So actually this week we are very close to release Flink 1.9. We're currently in the process of voting on the third release candidate. Another thing that we're discussing is overall community health. So one of the problems that the community is currently facing is a very high number of open pull requests. And another problem is that we have quite high build times on Travis. So we're discussing, for example, how to fix these issues publicly on the mailing list. And that's a great way to engage with the community, to just join these discussions and share your experience with Gradle as build system versus Maven, or with how to handle an ever-growing community, and so on. So I mentioned release voting, and also flips are usually voted. And I would like to quickly explain how voting within Flink and also other Apache projects works. And that is via consensus and different voting schemes. So the most important thing that we're voting on are releases. Usually the duration for a release vote is 72 hours on workday, so exclude the weekends. And during these release votes, we're doing legal checks and functional checks. And these votes require consensus, so no -1 votes and at least 3 + 1 votes by PMC members. And it requires consensus because if one person disagrees, then the whole vote is cancelled. But this wouldn't scale for all decisions to always require 3 + 1 votes. That's why many projects use lazy approval, which means somebody is putting a proposal onto the mailing list and says, I'm assuming that you all have agreed to this if nobody disagrees within 72 hours. So if somebody, for example, wants to, let's say, reorganize the wiki, then they would just write to the list, hey, I would like to reorganize the wiki. This is my proposal. If you don't disagree within 3 days, then I will do the changes. And that's a very effective way of also making progress within the community effectively. And this, what I've just described, is not really formalized, but we are in the process of formalizing it right now under what we call Flink bylaws. I've also shared the link here on the slides on our current proposal on the bylaws, and there's also an ongoing vote on accepting these bylaws in Flink. Another way of contributing to Flink is to contribute documentation or a website. The documentation of Flink is part of the code base. So I've shared the commands here on the slide to build the Flink documentation locally. And documentation is probably by far the easiest way to have a lot of impact and maybe actually also become a committer in Flink, because documentation is usually something that is not getting the attention it deserves, and that's why there's a lot of room for improving the documentation. There's actually a pretty big Flink improvement proposal currently being working on improving and updating the structure of the Flink documentation. So we're working on adding more interactive walkthrough tutorials to the docs. So contributions here are very welcome. And now I want to talk about contributing code to Flink. And what is important to understand is that don't just open a pull request and expect it to be accepted. There is a certain process involved in getting changes into Flink because it's a huge project with over 1 million lines of code and with a very large number of production users that expect from the project to be stable. And that's why we need to be careful with the changes we accept into the code base. And the first and most important step in a contribution is to open a Jira ticket to get consensus and buy-in from the committers. So if you found a bug or if you want to contribute a feature, open a Jira ticket, describe the bug or describe what changes you're planning to do. And then you will have to wait for a few days for contributors to discuss and to discuss with you this proposal. Because as I said earlier, there's a lot of implications that are very hard to see from the outside for some changes. Like we cannot just bump a dependency in Flink. We have to make sure that all the components are compatible with this new dependency version. If we realize during the consensus discussion in the Jira ticket that this is really a complicated change, then we might actually kick off a discussion on the development list or even ask you to write a flip to really describe all the changes that you're intending to do. Once there's consensus, once there's agreement on how we want to implement a certain change, we'll assign you to the ticket and you can start working on it. You can start implementing it, obviously following the agreed upon approach. And then you open your pull request, and ideally the people that discussed and got consensus with you on the change will also help you with the Refu and help you with the merging of the change. When opening a Jira ticket with Flink, there's a few good best practices that are all also, everything I'm talking about here is documented on the Flink website. But just as a reminder, so a good Jira ticket is created ahead of time, as I said. So opening a pull request without a Jira ticket will most likely just be closed because it hasn't been discussed and doesn't have a ticket. The ticket should describe the problem to solve. It is assigned to a component, because only if it's assigned to a component, it will get the attention from committers. So if you're not assigning it to anything, then the people that are working on connectors or the people that are working on SQL just won't really see your ticket. That's important. For the Refu, we are also following a Refu process where we are first checking whether formal requirements have been met, like a Jira ID in the title, description of the change, clean commit history, comments are properly prefixed with the Jira ID. We also check whether there has been agreement on merging and accepting the change, as discussed in the Jira ticket. Then we check whether the change fits into the overall Flink architecture. And finally, we look at the code. We look at the quality of the code. We look at documentation, error handling, concurrency, threading, about dependency changes, and so on. Opening a pull request in Flink needs a little bit of time, so we ask you to be patient, in particular at times when a release is happening. And another thing is that we are using labels on GitHub to track these 4 stages that I just presented. And you can also, as an external contributor, just, for example, look at the final quality stage of code, so that you don't have to look at the formal or the architecture fit, but rather focus on the code, which is usually the easiest to review when you're starting to contribute with Flink. Another thing that is important, that I also mentioned already, is that you should stay in touch with the people that you have discussed with when opening a ticket. So that's everything I wanted to present today. There are many ways to contribute to Flink. It's not only writing code, it's also supporting users, helping with project discussions on the development list. It's doing evangelism for the project at conferences and meetups. It's writing documentation or keeping the website up to date, or also writing blog posts on the Flink website or at your own blog, and code reviews, and finally fixes for bugs and features. So even if all this seems complicated and maybe not very welcoming because there's so many processes in place, contributions are very welcome and are the reason for Flink's success. The initial contributors would have never been able to implement all the features that we have in Flink today if we didn't have all these outside contributors that are helping. If you have any problem while contributing, reach out to me via my email address or via my Twitter account. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to put you in touch with the right contributors to get consensus and feedback. There's one more question, but I will answer this when I'm done with my slides. So one more slide I want to show is that we have a yearly conference happening in Berlin in October this year with a great schedule and great keynotes. So I really recommend to check out the website, and also if you want, feel free to reach out to me. I might be able to give you a discount code to get a cheaper ticket. We also have Flink Forward in other parts of the world. So we have a Flink Forward in China later this year, and also usually in April, a Flink Forward in San Francisco. And now it's time for Q&A. So there's one question: what kind of support is extended to someone new willing to contribute code? So this depends. So I think that Flink committers are usually overloaded because we have 500 open pull requests. So there's enough work for us to be done. And this also pretty clearly tells you that not all pull requests will always get the attention they deserve. But pull requests that are fixing bugs or like real annoying bugs, or that are contributing important features that are helping to really improve the user experience, will most likely get attention, and they will get support. They will get very deep discussion on how to solve a problem, and you will also get detailed feedback on your code. But what we also see is that sometimes people just open a pull request for the sake of being able to claim to have contributed to Flink. And I think it's a valid motivation to be engaged with an open source project. But if people are just trying to fix typos in the code, or even worse, change like stylistic things in the code, then the overhead or the effort for a contributor or for a committer to look at this change is just very high. And of course, committers focus rather on things that move the needle for Flink instead of things that that are just for contributors' fame. But in general, I think we try to be supportive to incoming contributions. I'm happy to take follow-up questions on this one, and also in general, I'm happy to answer questions around contributing to Flink, and also any other topic around Flink. So the next question is, what's the best way to take over an inactive issue? How long is the inactive await period? how to know if I can jump in. So in general, if a ticket is unassigned, you can jump into it right away. If a ticket is assigned to somebody, but nothing has happened for 2 months, then you can just ask and see what the status is. So, and also, if there has been a discussion on the ticket and it's clear that this implementation will take some time, or the person that is implementing it said that it will be complicated to implement, or that they don't have time right now or so, then it's just obvious from the context that the ticket looks inactive, but somebody's working on it. So there's no universal answer to this. It really depends on the discussion that has happened there. But in general, there are many inactive tickets, and probably what I would recommend is to look for tickets within your area of expertise. So if you have, for example, worked with Flink and Elasticsearch, then it might make sense to look for open tickets with Elasticsearch. And then you will find, I know it for a fact, that some users reported problems. So the next step would be to reproduce these problems and see how to fix them. And then I would just propose how you want to fix it on the ticket. And then ideally a committer says, oh yeah, great idea, go ahead. And this committer will then also assign you to the ticket and review the change and merge it in the end. The next question is whether issues have tags like good first issue. Yes, we had this discussion quite a time ago to annotate tickets with, I think, starter issues or something, or starter tag. The problem is that this is not very actively used, so it's probably very old tickets that that have this tag. I would really recommend to contribute in areas of your expertise. Flink is organized in components, which are fairly clearly separate, and yeah, I think this is the best way, because then you can bring your expertise into the community. If you're really open to anything, then connectors like Cassandra or Elasticsearch are one good area. Kafka, maybe not so much, because it's extremely heavily used and committers are fairly careful in accepting changes there. Another area is newer components, where there's just more work to be done and more opportunity to make an impact. For example, as I mentioned, the machine learning library is fairly new, and I think that if you know how to implement a certain algorithm, or if you know how to connect a certain library to the machine learning API, then that's also another great area. And then it's also bugs in general. So maybe not in the distributed coordination, distributed system part, but maybe more on the periphery, like handling F-row types, or fixing failing tests because of Unicode issues, or whatever reason why, like, when there's something wrong with the test infrastructure. I think these are also good starter issues. And also feel free to just reach out to me, and I can point you to some starter tickets. Like, I can make you a collection of a few if you want. Is it Flink ML? Yes and no. So in Flink 1.9, there has been a big change towards machine learning. So we have removed the old machine learning library and started implementing a completely new one. There's a flip in the Flink wiki that describes the new machine learning library and the new APIs. And these APIs are available in Flink 1.9, which is coming out hopefully this week or next week. So it's not on a doc website. So I think I'm not sure actually. I think the documentation for the old machine learning library has been removed. So the documentation is only available on the 1.8 documentation. But what I would recommend you is to look at the flip for the new machine learning effort in Flink. So I can quickly open this up on the website for you to check this out. So I'll just go to the flip overview. And then there's a table. Exactly. So flip 39, Flink ML pipeline and ML libs. So this is the proposal. It's released in Flink 1.9. It describes the concepts. It describes the API. And you can also see the link to the associated Jira ticket that has subtickets where you can see references, for example, for different implementations that are still open and unassigned. So these are areas where you can start contributing to Flink. So that's basically how to get started to contribute. So here there's a ticket, remove the legacy Flink ML. So this ticket probably contains at least a commit where you can see when this has been removed. Okay, I'll wait for a few more seconds if there's any other questions. Otherwise, thanks a lot for participating in this webinar. It was really nice. I'm very happy about the questions. They were good questions. And if you have anything you want to discuss offline or privately, just reach out to me via my email address, rmetzger@apache.org. I'm very happy to answer everything and help you with your first contribution to Flink. Thanks a lot.